In this movie, I'll show you how to flip and rotate your source material from a little known panel known as the clone source panel. So notice this blemish here on this girl's lip. If I try to take it on using the spot healing brush like so, then I end up making a real big mess of things. You can see that we've got a bad color match and it just looks terrible. So I'll go ahead and press Control Z or Command Z on the Mac to undo that change, and I'll switch over to the healing brush tool, which of course allows me to specify source point. But I can't just use any old source material. Notice if I source the skin, then I get rid of this edge between the lip and the skin, which is not what I want. So I'll go ahead and press Control Z or Command Z on the Mac to undo that. What I need to do is find another point at which the lip meets the skin that doesn't have a hair going through it, so we don't have a lot of room to work. Right about there is what I need. So I'll Alt-click or Option-click. And now when I paint over this area like so, I get this fairly alarming repetition of detail, which is not what I want at all, because that is such a giveaway that you've tampered with the image. So I'll go ahead and undo. What I need to be able to do is take the other side of the lip, which is in good shape. So I'll go ahead and Alt or Option click on it, but then if I paint, notice that the edge is running at the wrong angle. So it's going up and to the right instead of down and to the right. So what we need to do is flip that source material. So I'll just go ahead and undo that modification right there. And I'll go up to the window menu and choose Clone Source to bring up the Clone Source panel. And notice we have all these options for modifying the source. The most useful of them are the flip options, especially flip horizontal, because when you're working on faces, you're typically working on fairly symmetrical details. And then we have this rotate value as well. I'm going to turn on flip horizontal to start things off. And now I'll go ahead and paint along that lip, and you'll see that you end up getting a better result. Now I'm going to reduce the size of my cursor, and because I want to take up where I left off, I'll turn on the aligned checkbox so that I'm aligning the next brush stroke, and I'll paint over this area here. It looks like I went too far because I added a weird detail, so I'll just go ahead and try that again. I'll paint to this location, and then I'll fill in some of these gaps using the spot healing brush tool. So I'll go ahead and switch back to it, and then I'll paint away that little area, and I'll paint above the lip as well to make it look a little bit better. Maybe paint above this detail. That actually is not working at all. I'm bringing in a hair. So I'll just undo that. And I'll switch back to my healing brush tool. Notice here inside the Clone Source panel that the source is still flipped horizontally. So I'll just go ahead and Alt-click or Option-click at a new location. And then I'll paint up like so, and that'll get rid of that extra hair or whatever it was. And I can do that same thing with the bottom lip as well. I'll go ahead and Alt or Option click right about there, let's say, and now I'll paint this reflected material over onto the right-hand side of the lip. All right, now let's take a look at another application of this function. I'll go ahead and zoom in on one of the eyelashes of the right-hand girl, and notice that she has a little bit of a glob of mascara there. This time, I'm not going to want to flip, so I'll just go ahead and turn off this flip horizontal option, and I'll click inside my rotate value right there, because you never know how much you want to rotate things. And then I'll Alt or Option click right there in order to set a source point, and I'll reduce the size of my cursor like crazy, and then I'll move over that little chunk of mascara. Notice that things aren't quite at the right angle, so I've got to click inside that rotate value again. And you can change the value from the keyboard in 1 degree increments by pressing Shift along with an arrow key. So what I'm going to do is press Shift down arrow a bunch of times, and notice that that rotates that source material counterclockwise, which is what I want, but I don't want to go this far. So I'll press Shift up arrow to send it clockwise instead. And it looks like I have a match at about -5 degrees. So now I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept that value. I'll reduce the size of my cursor just a little bit, and I'll paint over that eyelash like so. Now that might seem like a pretty subtle modification, a lot of work for just that tiny retouch. But how about the eyebrows? Remember that hair that used to pass through the eyebrows? I retouched it away by shift clicking with the spot healing brush, but I didn't dare do that inside the eyebrows, so we still have a little bit of hair left. Well, I can take care of it by reflecting this information from the left-hand eyebrow. So I'll go ahead and Alt-click or Option-click in that left eyebrow. Then I'll turn on the Flip Horizontal option, and I'll press the right bracket key to increase the size of my cursor. Notice that I need to rotate things a little bit more in a counterclockwise fashion, which means I'm looking for a negative value. So I'll go ahead and click inside that rotate value, and then I'll press Shift down arrow a bunch of times, or just press and hold Shift down arrow until things look like they line up, which happens at about negative 29 degrees. Now I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept that change, and I'll just go ahead and click in order to start things off. And that might look a little bit too clunky, so I'll undo by pressing Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac. Make sure the Align checkbox is on now that you've set an alignment point, and that way you can reduce the size of your cursor and start out here and just make more of a fine-tune adjustment like so. And we get a surprisingly good match. And now if I want to return to a standard source that is neither flipped nor rotated, I can just click on the second guy right here, the second icon at the top of the clone source panel, and that will go ahead and give me a new standard source point that I can specify at my leisure. Now, right now, I don't have a source point since I switched to a new one. So if I were to click, Photoshop would get mad at me and say, you've got to Alt-click or Option-click to define a source point, in which case I would just go ahead and click OK, and then Alt-click or Option-click on a portion of the photograph that I want to clone. And that's how you flip and/or rotate your source material from the clone source panel here inside Photoshop.